You're listening to an In Focus podcast production.
I'm Stuart, and I'm the uncle.
And I'm Richard, and I'm the nephew.
And together,
we are
the Frustrated Authors. You haven't said you like my new glasses, by the way.
I wasn't that observant, I hadn't noticed, but they look nice, yeah. There's a big fly buzzing around the room, so if you see me jump up for a minute, I'm trying to swat it. I've already broken one of my lights from trying to get it.
We are in, what month are we in? We're in July, and this is number 4.
No, it's still June.
So it's
the end of June. Oh no, wait, we are in July, aren't we? I thought you did it because we're releasing it in July.
Should we start that again?
Yes, let's. So we're going with July.
We'll go with July.
Right. And the last one came out in April, didn't it?
Yes.
Right.
So Richard, we're in July and this is number 4.
It is, yeah. I mean, we're a bit later than we anticipated. I think we were looking at about a month between them, but I think it was about 3 months now.
Well, because you're getting quite ambitious, because you emailed me the other day saying, let's try and go monthly.
I think I said that at the end of the last one.
And
I say let's do them monthly, but then when it gets to the end of the month, and I haven't read the book,
it would add a level of discipline, because one of the more interesting things I think since the last one came out is that we've actually had someone get in touch with us with a book that they've published, I think published themselves, which we both had a read of and we might talk about later. A guy called Simon Houlton, who's written a book called Midnight Swimmer. And what's really interesting is it's set in and around Hastings, which of course is where I live. So I got to know it. But I think the fact that people are getting in touch with us is a really positive thing.
Yeah, it was great. That someone actually wants us to review their book. Like I said, I've read about 2 or 3 chapters, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's actually a really good book. Like I said, it's in Hastings, which I've been down to visit a few times. Reading it, I'm getting an idea. I'm picturing the places. Yeah. I can like the old town in George Street, where I went for a walk down there last time I was down
and visited some of the pubs, no doubt.
I think I went to a cafe there because the pub I went to watch the football, it was Man U Arsenal. That was in the sort of pedestrianised area.
Right. Yeah.
It was a bit rough, but it was. I sat and watched it, and there was an old boy sat with me for the first half, and then he left to go meet his friends for the second half of the football, and someone else came and sat with me for the second half. So it was a bit rough, but everybody was really friendly.
Good. The other thing we'll mention at the kickoff is we've kind of got our social medias up and running. So you can find Frustrated Authors on Facebook. And we've also set up our own Substack, Frustrated Authors Substack account, which I think in the coming month we'll try and publish some of our own writing that we've been talking about in the last couple of episodes and put that on there and kind of let people sort of see what we're doing, which might be...
Well, I'm going to be honest, I've not really done anything since the last episode, so I'll hold my hands up now because I know we're going to discuss what we've been writing, and I have written absolutely nothing. But yeah, we'll definitely put stuff up on Substack when I actually do it.
In fairness, you've actually spent some time last month digging out old material from your old ceased Apple account. So
I did, yeah.
Because I felt quite sorry for you. There was obviously quite a bit there, and it looks as if it was going to have been completely lost.
Yeah, so that was this thing we talked about, Jack and Simon. I can't remember another name he goes by.
Gary.
And I had Gary, that's it. I think it's Gary in this one.
I know you work better than you do.
Yeah, it sounds like it, yeah. But I remember that's probably the first I've ever got with a novel. And I'd written about 15,000 words on an iMac that I had. And then the computer, I came home one day and there was this big lump in the middle of the keyboard, which apparently was the battery.
Oh, yeah.
It had gone and it was really dangerous. So I had to get rid of the computer. And then I lost all my sign-in details for Apple. But I emailed them eventually. It wasn't actually that difficult a process.
Yeah.
I just emailed them. Yeah, there was something that I'd changed my mobile number from the account as well. So I had to then, it took a couple of weeks, but I've got access to it all again.
which is
So I've been going over it and rereading some of the stuff that I wrote, and it's actually quite interesting because it was about maybe 5 years ago, or even longer than that, that I wrote this stuff. So it's quite interesting going back and reading it with
it's
such a distance between it.
yeah, exactly. And I've had a kind of similar experience with my with you. I think we discussed it before. These two characters I've got called Frank and John, and I've gone back to sort of trying to create something about them, which I will stick up onto Substack after we record this. And kind of I've created an opening to the story, which I quite like. But one of the issues I'm finding in trying to take it forward is because these two people have been in my head for what is now 25 years, and every so often I've thought about going back and doing something with them. But also in the late 1990s, I wrote various bits for the story, some of which I can't find because some of them were printed out in hard copy because that's how long ago it was I was doing this. So there's some elements I'd like to put back in, but the idea of typing it all out again, and actually we've moved on. So yeah, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure whether I'm going to progress with that or whether I'm going to try and do something completely new. But one way or the other, I have found myself in the last month writing a chunk of that. So actually getting back into fiction. But my own Substack account, I've been relatively prolific. Some of it's just been old man rants. I got particularly upset about the way TV news treat things, and a couple of bits. I wrote a piece about the aging process, which is especially at my age is becoming something that I think about quite a lot, and that's actually had some quite good feedback. And in addition to that, I wrote a piece on basically I entitled it "Do We Need to Earn the World We Think We Deserve?" And that just tapped into this thing about Gen Zers and millennials being having a level of entitlement and think stuff should just be handed to them in a plate. When my generation, we had to work for things, lad. So,
Have you got
so
much
yeah.
feedback on that one?
Yes, I mean, whether it be through Facebook, there's been a few comments to Substack itself. Both pieces have earned me some new subscribers. And significantly, in the last month, I got my first paid subscriber.
Do you know
So
who it is?
I had, yes, oh yeah, yeah. It's
Is
somebody.
it Kate?
No. It's somebody I met a couple of times in the past, and probably a good 5, 10 years ago. But interestingly, he's followed other work I've done. When I did the Hastings and Focus website, he was a great supporter of that. So no, it's good. It's good to have. Yeah, it's enough
Yeah,
to.
I think with these things, it's like even with the podcast, is you want to build it slowly. So you get a few subscribers, so show progress, and hopefully that builds on it and it gets bigger and bigger.
And you can iron out the faults without too many people noticing.
Well, I certainly think that about especially the first two podcasts that we did. And if you listen back, it's almost like we should have done those and not published them because they're the dry runs, really, weren't they?
Yeah,
In some
I suppose
regards.
so. No reason why we can't go back and record them and pretend them.
Yeah, just delete them.
But
No, they're not that bad.
no, they're not. And it's quite interesting that when people are finding the podcasts or the podcast, the frustrated authors, they are looking at the figures and looking at the analytics. They're obviously finding one and then in fairly short order listening to the other two.
Oh,
So
that's good. That's good to
if
know.
if somebody's prepared to endure all three, then we're possibly getting something right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the biggest positive I got was one of my friends, and he said it sounds like a podcast, and he said, "I mean that in a good way." He says, it sounds like an actual podcast, not just to people trying to do a podcast.
Yes, yeah.
So I took that, and he's a tough critic, so it was yeah, he's read things of mine in the past, and he's pretty honest with you if he doesn't like something.
Yeah.
So I took that as a positive.
Oh, that's good. Would you quite like? Yeah, because as you know, I do some other podcasts as well, and it's just I just find it such good fun. I'm doing quite a few sort of one-to-one interviews and things like that under the banner of there's a lot of interesting people you've never heard of, and there really are. There's loads of people out there doing or having done some interesting things. So, but yeah.
You've also got your 5 minute, your wee 5 minute ones
Oh my, yeah, yes, yes.
where you like to rant about the roadworks.
Well,
That's peak old man rant, isn't it? About the
it is,
roadworks.
but I'm working on the next one at the moment, on the script for the next one at the moment. And what the thrust of that is going to be, why aren't people getting more angry? We're actually living in a society that I think is getting more angry, but we're getting more angry at the wrong things. So we're getting angry at supermarket staff, we're getting angry at restaurant staff, we're getting angry at fellow drivers, while completely ignoring the fact that politicians of all parties and at all levels, local government, you've got that thing called the Scottish Parliament, which is a complete waste of money in my mind. So you've got local government, you've got these assemblies, these mayors that we're setting up, all going to be spending money and creating, and they're all lying to us basically. Did you see the various cabinet ministers on TV this week, all being asked, does the British government support Trump's attacks on Iran? And none of them would give it's a simple yes, no answer, and none of them would answer the question. And I just wish people would get more angry about how badly we're being governed at all levels.
Yeah, I
Ranting.
think that's quite a valid point. I mean, I've stayed out of politics completely. I used to follow it, but I still watch the election results. I'd like to
Oh
stay
God,
away from
yes,
for the
yes.
general election results.
That's the
But
best night's viewing in 5 years.
it is, yeah, I always enjoy it. I usually, coincidentally, I do it with my friend that gave me the feedback on the podcast. We usually sit up together and watch it. But apart from that, yeah, I've lost the desire to try but it probably is because there's so much lying.
Yes. And I think that's why people
Mistrust.
don't get angry because they've just disengaged, which is a problem in itself.
And there's so many different opinions. Everybody contradicts each other, and I don't know, you just don't know what to think. But anyway, I think we're straying off topic from our book.
Well, can I just going back to Gary and Simon? What was the other name you gave Gary?
Jack, I think
Jack.
Gary. So Jack Gary is the character. I think Gary's a much more extreme version, and Jack's a more toned down version,
Right.
and Simon's the best friend.
Because I was having a read of the latest chunk he'd sent me, and I just there's some lovely bits in it. And again, because you've set it in Linlithgow, and obviously I know Linlithgow reasonably well, I can picture where they're walking, the pubs that they're going into. So I love the fact that of course you have them going into the Black Bitch, which political correctness is now forced to be renamed, or has it kept its name?
No, it's called the Willow Tree. So the company, I think it's Green King on it, and they changed the name to the Willow Tree.
Right.
But it's a bit of a misnomer because the Black Bitch is a town symbol, and it's a
Yes.
dog, and it's the story
Because
of
you are a black bitch.
yeah,
You're
because I was
born
born
in
in
Lithgow.
Lithgow, and
Yes.
I can remember being at a party at university. These two French girls were talking to me, and they asked me asked me where I was from, and then they said, "Oh, what are you called if you're from that town?" And I prefaced it all with it's not racist, it's to do with a dog, and I told them the story of the dog and the prisoner and the law, and then I told them, and their faces just dropped, and they didn't understand. So yeah, but I'm technically a black, and there's a black bitch society in Linlithgow, and yeah. So I did put that pub in just because I think it's got a good name, and I used to always drink in it as well when I was young.
But a couple of fascinating things that I really enjoyed is you've got the two characters going into the Black Bitch, and Gary's the one who's returned after many years away, and he's looking at the pub and thinking that it's hardly changed, where the relationship between him and Simon has clearly changed very significantly. And Simon himself is obviously a very different person to the one that Gary remembers from a decade before. He's clearly not able to hold his drink. There's one of the barmaids talking about, are you sure you should be having that? And I just love those little touches. I also love the way you deal with the approach a group of girls in the bar. And that reminded me of going back to an earlier episode when Holden Caulfield in Catcher in the Rye approaches that group of girls in the ballroom. I kind of sort of saw parallels in that.
Yeah, now you pointed that out, it is because, and again, that might be a red catch in the Ryan. It must have stuck in the back of my mind, or it's just a universal experience of men trying to approach women in bars uh, and being very nervous and making a fool of themselves, which I have done many times myself.
I can believe that.
Yeah, but I think reading it back, I was surprised because the first chapter, it's got quite a grey tone to it, even in the morning light and the grey mist and the grey morning light. The second chapter, I actually found it quite funny reading it back, and it's a lot more humorous.
Mm.
So I think the tone of the two chapters is doesn't really match up. So I'd have to go back because I think I'm going to go back and try and rewrite this because I think there is a good story there, but I'd need to decide on a tone, and I think I'd rather go for the slightly more comedic tone, which of the second chapter because I enjoyed reading it back a lot more, and the sort of hints, like you're saying, the hints that something's different about Simon, but I'm not going too far into it. It's just like trying to create a bit of interest for the reader.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like you're talking about going back and writing something, rewriting something you've already written. I'm kind of go back and forth because it was, I'd say, about 6, 7 years ago now that I wrote that, and it was a completely different person with different life experiences and a different stage of my life. It's whether I could go back and tap into that again to write it, and I've got enough. If I can remember enough of that period of my life where you are going out drinking and trying to chat up girls in bars, which I no longer do.
Yeah, I'll believe that.
Yeah.
But as I say, I like the name of the barmaids, Mal and Val.
But they were two barmaids. They were in a different pub in Linlithgow that we used to drink in when we were teenagers.
But
So we
they
used
are
to go
based,
along.
the
They're
big,
based, yeah, they're two, and Billy as well. Billy was the barman in the Black Bitch. Mal and Val were they were these two old barmaids, and we used to be about 16, and we used to go to a pub called the Crown, and we used to take over the pool room of the Crown. And Mal and Val, these two, I think I've described them as leathery old barmaids.
yeah,
And
I have a very clear picture in my mind of,
yeah,
of what they look like.
and they used to have to put up with us all at the weekends. And they did it with quite good spirits. And there was a sort of motherly, but they didn't take any nonsense off us
Yeah.
either. So they're based on real people.
I can just see them all in sort of plastic jewelry from the adult equivalent of Claire's.
um, I don't think I can't remember. No, I don't think they did wear a lot of jewellery. But it's so long ago, I can't remember. You can imagine that anyway. You can imagine it like that.
And the other thing I like is the one of the girls explains that she's a psychology student, which I think I can't remember which of you, I can't remember if it's Gary or Simon, but he's quite shocked because he had her down as a hairdresser. And I said, I kind of love the way hairdresser is a shortcut for someone that's not that bright.
Yeah, and that's more to highlight. It's Gary that thinks that, and that's to highlight Gary's arrogance. So he's meant to be. Oh, I thought it was really, but she's actually very into. And he also, so there's a bit about Pavlov and Pavlova.
Yeah, I
So
like
so,
that.
so that he thinks he's better than her, and he starts talking about Pavlova's dog, and it's like Pavlov's dog. So again, it's this I wrote this much later, or not much later, but after the other stuff, and I was trying to lighten the tone. Still have this contradictory character that thinks he's great, and he starts lying about himself to the girls as well. But just have a bit more fun with it and not make it so serious.
I am kind of looking forward, and I hope you do follow it because there's obviously something quite dark about Gary. Obviously, he's been away for so long that he can kind of cover up whatever it is that's been going on in his life. And I know you in the last episode you talked a little bit about one of the ideas you had for what that backstory is. So I hope you do more because it's kind of got me gripped within the first couple of chapters that I've read.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go back. They need to. I think that chapter needs polished up because I started introducing a third character who's Simon's friend.
Dave.
I think it's David. Yeah,
Yeah.
Dave. So that I think that'll be an interesting dynamic to have the three of them
Mhm.
together. But having read it back, I really do think I want to go back and work on it. It's just finding the time.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I've told you privately, I've been very busy with work, so it's just I've not had a chance to do any writing. I think hopefully when things calm down in my day-to-day job, which they are starting to do, I'll be able to put aside some regular time to writing.
Good.
And I think having someone you're reading it, like, giving me positive feedback, and I want to be able. We're doing this podcast. I want to be able to put something up for people to read instead of
Mhm.
just talking about it. So hopefully, if not by August, certainly September,
Yeah.
have at least the two chapters stretched out and refined and ready for other people to read.
And because the title of this podcast is The Frustrated Authors, and it came around because we both want to write, we both have ambitions to follow my father, your grandfather, and publish some novels, and it's about the frustrations and the things that are getting in our way of doing it. And one of the big things that gets in your way of doing it is just daily life.
It does, yeah. Yeah, you get a day off, and then I've been working for 6 days straight. You get a day off, and then I've got to clean the house,
There's other stuff to do.
and I think
Life
as well
gets in the way.
with writing, it's you can't really just do it for a day and then leave it for 2 weeks and come back. It builds on itself. So you sit down for a day, a couple of hours one day, and that first day you don't really, I don't find it particularly productive, but it's about getting back into the mindset
Yeah.
of writing. And I think you need to do it consistently, maybe not every day, but at least 3, 4 days a week. And it's just finding that regular time to do it.
I think it's also something that needs it creates its own momentum. So when you're developing the characters, when you're developing the stories, and you get into those, you build momentum that then has you want to go back and do more because you want to find out, you've got this idea where your character's going to go and you want to sort of take them there and see what the reactions are going to be. So yeah, if you do, 1,000 words today and then put it in the drawer for a couple of weeks, it's kind of having to rebuild the momentum again. And that's kind of where the struggle is. As I say, I've got Frank and John, and the couple of bits I've done, it was there. So I sat down at the keyboard and off I went. And I haven't done anything for a couple of weeks. And part of me thinks, how am I going to start that? How am I going to get into it? Where am I going to take it?
It's that initial sitting down to the computer. Even today, I sat down at maybe about 12 o'clock to type up my notes to send to you for the podcast. And I was like, oh, I can't really be bothered. But within about 10, 15 minutes of doing it, your brain's engaged and you start. And with writing, it's just sitting down to
Yep.
initially do it.
Yep.
But because you had said you're going to work on maybe do some serialization with Frank and John.
Yes.
How's that going?
What I thought of doing is rather than having it as a 100,000 word story that kind of, there's the beginning, there's the middle, and there's the end. It was about making it almost kind of each chapter as a separate story. And I've been going over some of the old stuff that I've found that's still available to me electronically. And yeah, and there are some great scenes because Frank is this slightly dark, mysterious character. We're not quite sure where he's come, what his background. Well, we know some of his background, but he's worked for the government. He's a data retrieval specialist, but it's not conventional data that he's retrieving. And then there are certain things that he does, there's certain actions, that the two of them go into this pub in Carlisle where someone attempts to mug them, and Frank demonstrates a particular set of skills, as I think is mentioned in the odd film or two, which would hint, sort of hints at the fact that perhaps he's more than just your average Joe who's able to sort of fend off a mugger. So there's lots of kind of that. So yes, I've got stuff, but it's then sequencing it and then ordering it because it's this thing about trying to sequence and trying to order the stories because there does have to be a beginning and there does have to be an end, and the stories have to come in an order that fits the kind of overarching sort of
But
narrative.
it does sound like the sort of characters and story that you're writing, it does lend itself to the idea of serialization, because you can imagine these characters having different things happening, almost like a TV show. It sounds like
Yes.
you could make a TV show out of it, and each week a new set of characters come to their. Is it an outward adventure or
It's
outward
an,
bound?
it's an out, it's on the front, it's an outward bound management training center. But actually, when you scratch beneath the surface, the Frank and some of his ex-military colleagues are teaching close protection skills. They're doing some work for the government, developing special forces people and things like that. But that's very much the front. So John becomes the front. John is an ex scientist, so he's Mr. Nice Guy. So he fronts up the business stuff, and you're right at the back of the piece of land where they've built what's called Outreach. This where the dark arts happened, and the two never meet. And as these characters develop, John becomes less of Mr. Nice Guy, less of Mr. Patsy, and he starts learning some stuff from Frank and learning some of Frank's skills. So it becomes, yeah, John at the outset is a bit of a wimp who perhaps he looks at Frank with some awe. And by the end of the story, or the beginning of the story, depending on how you look at it, because obviously I've written it in such a way that we join the story kind of 10 years after the main thing has happened. So by the end of their time together, John is a very different character with a very different set of skills, which he employs himself in certain ways. So yeah, I think I've said before, they were devised between myself and a friend of mine, and we one day concluded that we distilled all the best parts and all the parts of ourselves that we liked into this character, or that we would like to be into this character called Frank. And we distilled all the worst of ourselves and all the things that we didn't really like him into this character
Uh,
called John.
that's good, because I remember you said that last time. I just assumed that John was the best parts and Frank was the worst parts,
No.
but it's interesting to know it's the other way around.
Yes. Yeah. So basically I'd like to be a hired assassin, I think is what I'm trying to say.
There's still time.
Um,
Um,
Just before we get into talking about this month's book, Midnight Library, I just wanted to run something past you and see what you think. I've been to the theatre, Lovey. I go to the theatre quite a lot.
I was going to say you volunteer there. You're regular, aren't
Yes,
you?
regularly. I was working in the bar there last night. But there's been a couple of things have come up recently, and one I'm going to see tomorrow night, which is based on the backstory to Mrs. Danvers from Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. And earlier in the summer, saw the same woman doing a piece which was the backstory to Miss Havisham from Great Expectations. There's also been another play called Whiskey and Soda, which was about a meeting, which never actually happened, a fictional meeting between Margaret Thatcher and John Lennon. And I just wonder, is nicking characters that already exist, that have already been created, cheating a little bit?
I think the difference here is fictional and non-fictional. So the Thatcher Lennon one, I'm assuming he's probably done quite a lot of research into that.
He had, and it was also interesting because the meeting was in 1979. So Thatcher had just been elected, so hadn't become the character that we now kind of know her to be and remember her to be. Lennon in 1979 was still in the wilderness. It was another year before his comeback album Double Fantasy was released, and he was assassinated. So they come together at a time where neither of them is is at the peak of powers. So that was quite interesting. But all I'm thinking of, and especially with the Mrs. Danvers and the Miss Havisham one. So Miss Havisham, in Great Expectations, when we meet her, she's a recluse. She was stood up on her wedding day. She still wears her wedding dress. The wedding tables are still laid out. Even if I take that story back to when that character was a child, which is kind of what they did, I still know what the ending is. So everything I'm doing is working towards a character who someone else has created.
Yeah, if you're using someone else's character, which is with this, I don't know, there's a bit off about that for me. As I say, a non-fictional character that you've researched. Like I've read some really good fiction based on. I think Robert Harris. Robert Harris did three. It's called the Cicero trilogy. And it's based around the fall of the Roman Republic, and he researched that. And it's got Cicero obviously as the main character,
Yep.
Caesar, Crassus, Pompey, all these greats of Roman history. And he take liberties with the characters because obviously they're 2,000 years old.
Yep.
But they're great novels. But I think if you're just to take another person's creation and write their backstory, I don't know. I personally wouldn't do it.
I mean,
It seems a little bit like cheating to me.
it was a very good play, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But what you kind of have to remember watching it is because you're thinking, oh, that's why that happened to her. And then you go, but wait a minute, she was a fictional character anyway, so this didn't actually happen to her. I think good plays, good stories, and I'm looking forward to this one tomorrow night about Mrs. Danvers, because I don't know if you've seen the film, Rebecca, or read the book,
I
but
haven't, but I know, I don't know what, I must have been in like The Simpsons or something. I know the kind of feel of of what it's about.
If you're enjoying this podcast, then we'd be delighted if you could leave us a rating and a review. It helps others find our content, and always feel free to share our podcast with your friends.
So this month's book, or this edition's book, is Midnight Library, which was one that you came up with. Author Matt Haig. I'd read it a little while ago, I think shortly after it came out, and absolutely loved it at the time. So when you suggested it, more than happy to read it again and thoroughly enjoyed it again. Do you want to kind of explain what it's about?
So the main character is Nora Seed, which I want to come back to discuss the name because I hate it. But her name's but her name's Nora Seed. And the book opens and you're introduced to her and she lives in Bedford and she's not a particularly happy person and she's not happy. She has, I think, what this situational depression is what she tells us the
Yes.
doctor diagnosed her with. And then she has a very bad day and she goes home and eventually I think the final straw of the day is her cat dies and she decides to kill herself. So it's a very bleak opening to a book. She overdoses. Instead of dying, she goes to a place called the Midnight Library, where she meets a mysterious character. The character is Mrs. Elm, who's a high school librarian. It's in the form of Mrs. Elm, but she's a librarian. But it's not the actual Mrs. Elm, who tells her that she can. The whole library is her life, different lives that she could have lived, and that she can now, before she dies, she can try and live in other lives, if she'd made different decisions and find one where she'll be happy, and she can stay in that life instead of dying. And then that's how the book goes from there. That she tries different lives. She's in Australia. She owns a pub with her ex-partner. She she was on an Arctic mission, scientific mission. Where else did she go?
Oh, it came most significantly Cambridge,
Cambridge, yeah.
where she lands in what appears to be the most perfect idyllic life.
Hmm.
And even in that, she's not happy.
No, I
And
know there's a
she's not
swimming one.
she's not content.
Yeah, there's something feels off.
Yes.
Even in that most perfectly. She's a swimmer as well. She's an Olympic swimmer. She's a rock star. Yeah, she lives multiple lives, and that's basically the structure of the book is her coming back to the library and trying different lives, and she'll leave any life when she feels as soon as she feels a hint of disappointment at that life, she will go back to the Midnight Library.
She's swept
Um,
out on it. I think it's worth saying as well, in her, what they term her root life. So in the life that she's been living, the one that's driven her to the verge of suicide, she was a child in her childhood. She was a very good swimmer, had potential to be in the Olympics, but felt she was driven on by her father. She was also a musician, played in a band with her brother and one of his friends. They had the opportunity to go big and become get a recording contract and what have you. And she pulled the plug on that. So in her root life, she feels guilty about having let her father down, her brother down. But the thing that fascinates me is in the other lives. Okay, she might have had a better relationship with her brother because they went on and became huge rock stars, had fame beyond the wildest dreams. But her brother dies. So yes, she's got the success, but her brother's dead. And it's these contrasts that I just think of, because basically throughout the book, you're playing with the same set of characters, but in different situations and relating to her in very different ways.
yeah, I mean, that's one of the big things I picked up on is how she impacts others' lives. Like I say, so she makes the decision that the band's called The Labyrinth. They're about to sign a record deal, and she pulls out of the band because she's having panic attacks, which she gives up swimming in a life where she doesn't give up swimming. Her dad doesn't have a heart attack and die. So these decisions impact other people's lives, but not she in her root life. She always thinks that all the decisions she made impacted everybody negatively in her root life. Whereas actually she finds out over the course of the novel that you can't really you can't really live your life like that. You know, and so in some lives, the decisions she makes have beneficial impacts on the people around her, and other ones they have negative. And you can't live your life trying to foresee how your decisions have impacted other people.
I think one of the things I love is going back to what you described as kind of the final straw on this really bad day she's having when she eventually decides it's time to end it all. And of course, Ash, who we meet later in the story, comes to her door to tell her about her cat having died. And of course, the cat's found lying at the side of the road, and Nora assumes that the cat has been hit by a car or something. You know, the cat has died in an unpleasant way. Whereas later we discover that the cat has actually died of natural causes. The cat wasn't very well in the first place. So it wasn't her fault for letting him out and getting hit by a car. It was going to happen anyway.
Yeah, I think that's Mrs. Elm says that yeah, didn't get hit by a car. But there's some sort of genetic fault with the cat, and it was all in every life that cat would have died at that point because of something out with Nora's control. And that's the journey she goes on, is to discover that not everything that goes wrong in life and the people around us life is her fault. And then the impact as well. We're jumping ahead, but when she finally realizes that her root life is the only life she can live in, our little old man that lives next door to her that she picks up her prescription for, in another life where she's not there, he's living in a care home.
Yep.
And just these little things, and the boy she teaches piano to, and she doesn't teach him piano, he becomes a delinquent, and he's arrested, and he certainly went down a path in life where he's committing crime. Whereas when she was teaching him piano, that's the thing that stopped him going down that life. So she realizes the positive impact in her root life that she has on the people around her.
I mean, there's again, you were saying weeping towards the end. I'm sort of weeping quite far towards the end, but there's a lovely passage relating to the fact that we're talking about different stories potentially that her life could have taken. As we reach the conclusion of the book, that as I say, I just like this passage. We can't tell if any of those other versions would have been better or worse. Those lives are happening, it is true, but you are happening as well, and that is the happening we have to focus on. Of course, we can't visit every place or meet every person or do every job, yet most of what we'd feel in any life is still available. We don't have to play every game to know what winning feels like. We don't have to hear every piece of music in the world to understand music. We don't have to have tried every variety of grape from every vineyard to know the pleasure of wine. Love and laughter and fear and pain are universal currencies. That just, as we got to the end of the story, that passage just kind of gripped me. I thought, oh yes,
I think there's quite a few passages towards the end where you start welling up a wee bit and you get a bit teary.
again, it's a very emotional book.
Especially towards the end. That if we're talking about the book, there are points I got a bit bored of it with some of the lives, but the last when she gets into the Cambridge life and that the last maybe about 75 pages are really it's quite profound
Yes.
and emotional, and I really enjoyed it. And I was telling you before we started recording that I was reading it. I work at a food market, an outdoor food market over the summer, and I've always got a guy with a guitar that sings away. So I was reading the end of the book because it's quite quiet, and the guy was singing "Que sera sera" on the guitar, which only added to the feeling of emotions and how profound this book was. But it was quite. I just felt that was quite an interesting. The themes of the book were reflected in the song that this guy was singing at the same time, and it sort of hinted at the universal themes that the book deals with, and how people all over the world in all cultures deal with feelings of inadequacy and the what ifs in life.
There's also a lovely piece where she meets a character called Kerry Ann, and she was at school with this female called Kerry Ann. Again, this is towards the end of the book, so this is as we're sort of reaching various conclusions. And Kerry Ann tells her that I was in awe of you when we were at school. Obviously, Nora was something of a hero to this girl, Kerry Ann. But what I thought was then an interesting counterpoint is while Kerry Ann's telling her how much she meant to her and how she looked up to her and how she respected her, she then says, "But did you ever make it to the Olympics?" And surely, if this girl woman was as in awe of Nora as she says she was, she'd have known if she'd made it to the Olympics because it would have been in the local papers. She'd have been in the local TV and the local radio. So, in any one of a number of ways, local people would have known very well that she'd made the Olympics. So, as I say, I just think that's an interesting contrast.
We plot hole. The book, like the best thing about the book, I think, is it's sort of the moral of the story and how it's all. I mean, it's pretty much a therapy session in a novel, really, isn't it?
It is.
And
It
it's
is.
about telling you how to really appreciate what you have in life, and the decisions you've made in your life lead to the point of your life where you're at, and nothing you can do. You can't go back and change things the decisions you made, because even in this book, we could get bogged down in the whether there are an infinite number of universes. I mean, it's way beyond my educational level. I don't have a clue about quantum physics. But in this book, there's an infinite number of universes. But Nora can't live. The Nora from the root life can only really live in her own life. You know, even in I think that's the most profound thing about the Cambridge life, where she's married to Ash and she has a daughter that's 4, and she loves her daughter, and she spends the most time in that life. But ultimately, she's never fully adapts to that life because it feels unearned to her, because she knows that it's not the version of her. The root life version isn't the version that earned all this, and so she ultimately leaves it. But through the course of the novel, she realizes that her root life has got value and meaning, and she wants to live, and she doesn't want to die. And then when she comes out, she does survive, and her brother comes to see her, and she starts rebuilding her own life.
The other thing I get from it as well, and this is something I've found as I've got older, because I don't think people say these sort of things to each other when they're younger, but I think there's that thing about how other people see us, and we never quite fully understand how other people see us. And yeah, there was an example of someone I was at school with, and she and I we really never got on. To say we hated each other is probably a bit strong, but we certainly, if we could avoid being in the same room and close to each other, that was the case. And through that kind of social media, we got in touch. And basically, I didn't know her backstory. She was, her mother was a single parent. I don't think they had a particularly, there obviously wasn't a lot of money to splash around, all of that. And here was me turning up to school, being driven there by my father and his Jaguar. So, there was that sort of kind of, little snob. Um, and again, you know what life is like around sort of Stirlingshire, because obviously you've lived most of your life around there. And my mother, your grandmother, insisted that we all spoke properly, which, again, in the environment we were living in, did kind of single you out. So kind of people had this view of me that I didn't, and I know later in life as well, people have a view of me that I don't quite recognize. But that's how they see me. That's how they see me. But we don't know that, and it's quite interesting. I think there's a lot of relationships and a lot of how people look at each other is based on, well, I'd actually quite like to be like that, and
A bit jealous. Well, sounds
yeah.
like this girl from school. There was an element of
But yeah,
jealousy.
I think that works both ways. I can think of people at school that you look at and think, oh, yeah, I'd like to be more athletic. I'd like to be more musical. I'd like to be more of what they are, what he is, what she is. And what I think Midnight Library does is it just kind of hooks onto that fact that we'd all, the what if, what have we done something else? What have we been better at? What if we'd done a bit more study for our exams? I'm now 63. So you do sometimes think, oh, well, what should I have done differently? But again, reflecting to Midnight Library, every decision you make has an effect on your life, according to the Midnight Library. And so you think of the big things, and in terms of all the big things in my life, there's nothing I'd want to change. And then you start to think about the little things that you could have changed. Well, maybe I should have taken that job, or maybe taking a job's a big one. I don't know. But you start to think about the little things, and you think, well, actually, I couldn't have done that without it affecting the big things. And even looking back now over a career that spans kind of 40 odd years, I look at the things that didn't go right, or the things that you could describe as failures, but they've all added and they've all created the person that I am today in the situation that I am today. And actually, I'm really quite happy with that. Whether you could say that in your 40s and your 30s, I'm not sure. Whether that's something you can say from the comfort of your 60s, I don't know. But looking back, yeah, everything I've done, as I say, even the negative stuff, even what you could consider the failures, has all contributed to where we are.
I think that's something I try to practice. Like I suppose you call it gratitude, isn't it? Or just to you, you can be so popular culture and media and things. You can get disheartened by the fact that your life isn't as glamorous as some
Yep.
people's lives appear to be. But and you'll get taken by it. But I try to always think of the positives in your life and be appreciative of them. But like you're saying, it might be easier when you're 60s when you've got that. You can look back from a position of success and be like, well, even the hardships were on a journey to somewhere. Like I often think about when I was doing my masters at Edinburgh. I was studying a history masters, and I wanted to do a PhD, and I dropped out halfway through the masters to try and write a novel, which I never did. hence
There's a
the
theme here.
yeah, hence the podcast. Well, it's a novel the stuff I've been sending you that I dropped out of masters with some romantic idea. But I often think about if I hadn't dropped out of masters, there would be that lingering. Well, I never did try the novel. So even though I've tried to do the novel and I've not succeeded yet, at least I've tried. And whereas if I'd I hadn't tried, it would have been still lingering there, thinking, oh, I wish I'd done that. But also the sort of person that I feel like it grounded me a lot more dropping out of university because I think you tend to, when you're young and you're at uni and you're learning, you tend to it's quite hard not to foster a high opinion of yourself. And I think that just having this time away from education is allowed me to probably grow as a human and become a better person, a more rounded person, and not as up my own arse about my intelligence, which I've come to realize is pretty average.
But I think that is something that we see in Nora, because I think by the end of the book, she understands herself much better, and I think she was kind of up her own arse in a different way, in a very negative way, and she's come to see that, oh, well, actually, where I am is fine. She sort of kind of starts to forge a reunion with her brother and finds out that actually he's not as pissed off as she thought he was
Yeah.
about the whole thing with the band. And of course, she's delighted because he's still alive, which he wouldn't have been. So
And
it's just all of those things. It just resonates with I think everybody, as I say, thinks about, oh, what if we did it differently, or what would happen if we'd done that?
yeah, and I listened to a podcast that Matt Haig did. It was talking about his work more generally. I mean, he was describing it. I think when he was about 24, and he almost committed suicide. And I think he's got a very extreme example of what everybody experiences. So he's quite open about his mental health problems, but I think everybody experiences the same things that Nora goes through, but maybe a lot of people just deal with it in a better way, or more able to cope with disappointment in life and rally themselves. Whereas she is, at the start of the novel, she is wallowing in self pity. But the character of Nora as well. One of the things that does kind of bug me a bit is she has so many talents. Like, so she's, she could be an Olympic swimmer. Like, yeah, like she's just, she's a glaciologist. I get why he does it in the book, because it takes you to all these different interesting places. She has the potential to do almost anything in life, whereas I don't think every person has the potential to do everything in life. But I suppose for the normal, you just kind of let it go.
Tell me, why don't you have the name?
I just think so. The whole kind of imagery of the tree. So she's the root life, and you've got this trunk, and each decision splits off onto a branch, and the branch and the tree of life. And I just feel like Nora Seed. It's the second name. It's just, if I'd written it and called it Nora Seed, I'd be like, it's just too obvious. It's too on the nose. You're kind of labouring this metaphor. And then it's the same with Mrs. L. I'm like, we get it. We get the tree of life stuff. Like, you can lay off it a wee bit.
You've laboured
It's
that.
just a minor criticism. Okay.
He's laboured that one a bit too much.
Yeah, yeah. Which comes on to something about his style. The bit you read was, I think he's particularly later in the book. There's some really profound passages, and some of the imagery is really good.
Yeah.
I also, at the start of the book, I don't know if it was when he was first writing, he was trying too hard, and as the book went on, as he was writing the book more and more, he sort of toned it down. But some of the imagery at the start of the book, I was like, "What the hell is this?" Like, it's the stuff that I feel like if I was to write it, I'm very critical of myself, but I've written them down. So yeah, it was like the overuse of imagery earlier in the novel. So I've got one here. Mrs. Elm's eyes came alive, twinkling like puddles in moonlight. I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I can think of better ways of saying that. I don't like that.
And then the town was a conveyor belt of despair, which again is an image that I just feel I can understand where he's going with it, but it just created
it doesn't quite work.
Yeah, it just created a weird image in my head of like
All these depressed people on a conveyor belt.
yeah, kind of, yeah, and all like buildings all just kind of whirling past her on conveyor belts. And then the one that really got me, the odd word or phrase that floated in her mind like croutons and minestrone, which I've written next to that terrible image. But that comes back to the point of when I'm writing, and going back to read this earlier stuff, is that I think sometimes you feel the need to put loads of metaphors and similes into the writing. And
That shows how intelligent you are.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that I used to do. And then it's like almost every paragraph has some sort of imagery. And I think I've discussed it before where I was something I wrote about a flood and it was so over the top that people were floating down the street. But it's something that I've been working on in my writing is trying to scale it back and just picking your moments to put something in. And he does it really well in other places. There's some really good writing. And overall, the book's really well written. It's just I felt like at the start there was a bit of maybe trying just too much to
Try
at the
too
start of the
hard.
book. Yeah, yeah.
It'd be interesting actually because we haven't ever introduced any of my father's books to this, and given that that's effectively where the inspiration for this whole thing came. But the one thing that I remember about reading stuff that Dad wrote is just the flowery detail and the similes and stuff like that he used. It was slightly over the top. It's not my style. Maybe it was a style of the time. It probably put me off reading his books, to be honest with you,
I mean, yeah, I've tried.
which is
Yeah,
a dreadful thing to say.
I'm looking at one just now, Shinwen Mission, which I haven't
Yes.
read. I think yeah, I've talked about in the past, Assault Patrol, and I read a little bit of it, but I was quite young when I tried to read it, so I need to go back.
The one he,
We should do one of his books at some point.
yeah.
But I think with it, sort of the language and that's in prose, I very much prefer a more direct style of prose where there is imagery in it, but it's not impenetrable and
Yeah.
it's not overbearing in the text.
But overall, a good read, and I think one that we both enjoyed.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah. I mean, I felt like the second time I read it, it had a much deeper impact on me, and I really enjoyed the, as I say, the message of the book. I feel like some of the lives were a bit pointless.
The first leap she does is to this country pub that she's running with Dan. And Dan, in her root life, is this kind of man who she's kind of not sure about, but is he the best thing that she's going to get? And of course, she immediately finds herself in this life where he's cheating on her. He's spent all the money. Basically, what initially, when she arrives, she thinks is quite an idyllic life, falls apart very, very quickly, and and
Uh-huh.
she sees the real him.
Yeah, so she at the start there's a lot of guilt because she jilts him,
Yeah,
and then so that's the first life she chooses, and she's yeah, as you say, very quickly within about an hour or so being in that life, she realizes it's not the one for her. But I do feel like in the middle of the book we go through a lot of lives, and it does lose a bit of momentum and it gets a bit repetitive at times. Whereas and the way it impacts the characters as well, like you're saying, we'd see different versions of characters. So there's this cast of characters around her in her life. But I do feel like characters like her brother Joe, I don't feel like I ever really knew who he was as a
no,
character. In the swimming one, so we meet Joe, I think, for the first time properly in the one where she's an Olympic swimmer or a retired Olympic swimmer. And he sort of just dumps all this backstory on her about that life. I just felt like it was it just not very impactful, and I never really connected with him. And then there's a character, Ingrid, that we were introduced to in the Arctic episode, or the Arctic part, where she's a glaciologist. And again, it's we meet the character and she just tells us all about her backstory, which we've just met her, and it's quite a sad backstory. And her husband's died, but it felt quite meaningless because I don't know who she is, and you don't meet her again after that
yeah.
either. So I think that's the downside of the story. But you couldn't really tell the story any other way. I suppose you could, as you could. I think you
I-
could maybe have had less lives, but more. You spend more time in those lives would be a way to do that.
that would have been an interesting one. But then there's so much option in the Midnight Library. It would turn into a very nice TV series
Yeah, could do. Yeah.
where each week you could have. We're back to Quantum Leap. There's a TV series called Quantum Leap, and that's exactly what that was. So yeah, but Midnight Library would be a much softer, gentler version of that.
Well, I've never seen Quantum Leap, but where was it around the 70s or something? Or was it?
80s or 90s.
Was it?
I'm sure it's probably available in some obscure digital channel like You and Dave plus one or whatever it's called. Time is running out, quite literally, as we're on my my Zoom account, which I refuse to pay for. That's how Scottish I am.
Maybe a few more subscribers we can afford a Zoom
Exactly.
account.
Yeah. Subscribe now, folks. Go and subscribe to our Substack account and pay us some money, and then I can afford to pay for an unlimited Zoom call. Just thinking about the next one, because someone said to you they actually quite like the idea of us flagging up the book that we're going to be talking about in the next one, so they can read it in advance.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. So people could read it, and then yeah, they could read it. They could choose to read it if they want, and they'll have a better understanding of what we're talking about. So I think what we're going to do is you're going to come up to Edinburgh in August, and we're going to go for a day at the book festival.
Aye, we're going to do that, son.
I get a new photo taken for the podcast.
With Edinburgh Castle or something in the background.
Some books or something. Because I've just had a few people talk to me about that picture in the background of our photo. It reminds them of a female body part. But
I'm looking at it now, and yeah.
Yeah, it was Liam told me we were having dinner the other day. We're out for family lunch. He mentioned it. But yeah, so we're going to be in Edinburgh. So I was thinking we could do something based in Edinburgh. Again, this would touch in with Midnight Swimmer that Simon sent in, reading something that's set in a place you're very familiar with. So we could do something set in Edinburgh. The natural one would be Trainspotting, or we could do something, a Scottish-based novel. So what would you think?
You mentioned, again, before we started recording, you mentioned one that sounded quite interesting.
So the Sound of My Voice by the Scottish author Ron Butlin.
Okay.
And it was published in the 80s. I think it's a really good book.
So what about we do The Sound of My Voice as our main book, but we also have just a quick, because I've certainly read Trainspotting, and I'm sure you probably have, but we have a little refresh around that, and compare and contrast, and talk about some Scottish fiction.
That sounds like good.
Talk about your grandfather, who of course is a well-known Scottish writer. Well,
That's it, yeah.
in his own household, he was.
But I think as well the two novels that we're doing, Trainspotting's written in Scots.
Yep.
The Sound of My Voice isn't written in English. Also, Trainspotting I think was written in English first, but he changed it. But yeah, let's do those two.
Yep, that's fine.
And because neither of them are particularly long books, and Trainspotting you could dip in and out of.
Yep, no, that's good. Excellent. Okay, so that's number 4 in the bag, and plans for number 5, and also hopefully we might at some point, whether it'll be number 5 or number 6, certainly hope to get a chat with Simon Houlton, the writer of Midnight Swimmer, and just find out a little bit about his journey to finishing something.
I'm impressed. It's a really good book. I've only read it a bit, but I'm really enjoying it.
I love it. Yes, we might get some tips on how to finish things.
Aye, that sounds good to me.
And that's it. We'll finish this.
Yeah. Okay. So until next time.
Bye-bye for now.
If you're enjoying this podcast, then we'd be delighted if you could leave us a rating and a review. It helps others find our content, and always feel free to share our podcast with your friends.